Clayton Menzel, Head of Business Development at Babylon Labs. Welcome.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Hey, I want to start out with some statistics here. Looking at the Babylon staking dashboard. As of right now, there's 48,000 BTC, 48,000 Bitcoin that has been staked, and which is about $4 billion worth, which is a tremendous number. Let's start out with the product. Well, how did you guys get to this level of staking? Because it's pretty incredible that people are willing to do this with their Bitcoin. So, what is it that's driving them to stake their Bitcoin on Babylon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have data points historically on people wanting to put their Bitcoin to work. And unfortunately, a lot of those venues were on centralized platforms like Celsius and BlockFi in the past. So ultimately, we have been working for the past 3 years on figuring out like how could we offer more native solutions for putting your Bitcoin to work on chain, more decentralized, more secure, more control from an end user perspective. So essentially, that's what we built on the Bitcoin network, which is a native staking functionality that anyone can leverage in a non-custodial way. So this Bitcoin is not bridged or pegged. We leverage Taproot and UTXO transactions on Bitcoin, so this staking functionality sits natively within your wallet on the Bitcoin network. Really, the goal for us, right, is having more opportunities for people to do more things with Bitcoin on chain. We think the easiest way to get people comfortable with doing things with Bitcoin is staking it first, right? It's generally not super high in risk. It's fairly passive action to do as a delegator as well, especially if you trust your validators. But then, that gets their feet in the door, right? Obviously we're a staking protocol. That's what's been live for the past, since August of last year at this point. But the ultimate goal, right, is to build more use cases on top of that. So we have a lot of LST issuers that leverage that staking mechanism to build liquid staking tokens on top of Babylon as well, with the goal of bringing more of that, less, custodial centralized Bitcoin, whether it be like wrap Bitcoin or CBBTC, into more decentralized ecosystems. And then on top of that, we do plan to offer this stake to other protocols that want Bitcoin security as well as this liquidity that people are building LSTs on top of. So that's kind of the main three facets of the protocol on the shared security side and staking side. And then the other, addition is our own chain, which is Babylon Genesis that recently launched last week. It is a layer one blockchain. It's effectively the control plane for all of these Bitcoin stakes and the protocols that are connected to these Bitcoin stakes. But also at the same time, it's a layer one blockchain. So we do envision a lot of Bitcoin DeFi activity to be happening on there in the future, and act kind of as a central hub for this liquidity long term.
Now, there's a lot going on. There's the staking platform, and then you launch Babylon, or Babylon Labs launched Babylon Genesis, which is the layer one. Maybe we could simplify for the audience, like Babylon, the platform, the staking product. So there's two sides, right? It's a two-sided market. You've got the supply side, people that provide Bitcoin or that stake Bitcoin, and then there's the other side, the demand side, people that want some, I guess, a shared security from that Bitcoin. Could you maybe, from a BD perspective, maybe explain like why would someone want to stake their Bitcoin? Like what's in it for them? And then maybe on the other side, how projects can benefit from the shared security from that Bitcoin at stake.
Yeah, definitely. On the staking side, it's fairly easy, right? Limit the sticks and have as many carrots in place as possible. The good thing about us targeting Bitcoin as an asset is there's not a lot of yield generating opportunities for Bitcoin natively on the Bitcoin network. So our goal is to reward people who are actively staking Bitcoin, but also that the hurdle rate is not as high as if you're looking at like Solana, for example, because there's already a staking functionality on Solana and it's earning people 7% APY. There's zero APY opportunity on Bitcoin currently, but the ultimate reason for anyone staking, right, is like the expectation of future rewards, while also acknowledging any potential risk in the form of slashing before doing something. Babylon Genesis, which is the protocol that we launched last week, is a Bitcoin secured network, what we're calling BSNs. It's going to be the first. It is the first BSN in the broader Babylon ecosystem, but that protocol is actively paying for this Bitcoin security currently. The reason we're doing so, and the reason why we envision a lot of other BSNs in the future to do so, is there's an inherent connection between not just the security that we're providing, but also access to this liquidity through our LST issuers. And so, if looking at three things that I would personally like to see proliferate within crypto in general, right? It's like leveraging our staking solution, whether that be to earn rewards by providing security, or using that as a way to issue LSTs on top of. The second is liquid representations of these stake positions, like proliferating broadly across the wider ecosystem. And then the third is like those being represented on Bitcoin secured networks, because ultimately those networks are what are paying for these for Bitcoin security, right? So I think it's in the long run, it's going to be similar to how you see most ETH being used as collateral for DeFi within the broader Ethereum ecosystem. We envision Bitcoin being used as collateral within the broader BSN ecosystem, and the majority of Bitcoin that's being used in DeFi will be on Bitcoin secured networks, because you're receiving the security from the collateral that exists within that ecosystem. So I think that's the main difference between us and maybe other shared security protocols in the space, where we're really acknowledging like the connection between DeFi and the security that they're paying for, and kind of connecting them in a more simplified way. In the sense of like, we don't necessarily target middleware services, like we're actively targeting execution layer environments that benefit from that TVL and end user growth more directly if liquidity exists on that chain.
I think what's also unique about Babylon is that, many of this like on the Ethereum side, for example, it's because it's proof of stake. The ETH has been staked somewhere, and then it's being restaked, rehypothecated kind of over and over again. On the Bitcoin side, because it's proof of work, the first time it's staked, it's been on Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's quite unique, because the risk to the staker in that case is a lot lower, because it's the first time their Bitcoin has ever been staked. And so it hasn't been restaked elsewhere up until they've staked their Bitcoin on Babylon. How do you I guess think about the rehypothecation as a risk?
I mean, as long as you acknowledge the risk, you can do whatever you want. But yeah, I mean, it should be acknowledged that there is risk anytime you stack anything on top of each other, right? So I think what we're doing, right, is creating this like baseline way to participate, and then obviously you can do things. And on the restaking side, right, we have a protocol called SatLayer that is a restaking protocol leveraging Bitcoin LSTs that offer more security guarantees beyond just like objective slashing that we offer to protocols through our staking functionality. But then again, yeah, to your point, like if you're actively staking, actively restaking, and then using that asset as collateral, obviously your reward rate is going to be higher because you're getting yield sources from 3 different venues, but you're also stacking the risk up at the same time. And as long as you're aware of that, then I think that's fine. We should let people be able to do whatever they want, but you should recognize that there's always a scenario where something it could happen in the form of like a death spiral or something. But in general, a lot of these folks have learned their lesson over things that have happened in the past, and we really haven't seen any sort of like catastrophic incident like that with Eigenlayer just yet. That being said, I don't even think slashing is live on Eigenlayer currently.
Yeah. We kind of jumped into the Babylon data right away. Maybe we can back up a little bit and talk about you and how you got into the crypto space. Um, and had you always been in the Bitcoin ecosystem, or if not, like how did you get in?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first asset I bought in like 2013 when I was still in college, but I didn't really spend a lot of time in the space until like 2017, when I got invited to the Ethereal Summit in New York. And that was when like smart contracts were a thing and people were talking about stable coins and like, supply chain stuff. And I was like, oh, this is not just like store value internet money used for illegal things, which like was generally the use case in 2013. Um, but I joined Figment in 2020, which was an institutional staking provider. I've also like helped launch a fund there called Figment Capital, and then worked at an LRT that was building on Eigenlayer, and then that got acquired by Eigenlayer. And then I joined Babylon in September of last year. So my entire life has been around the staking space, and what staking means, not just for protocols, but also DeFi, and how not just institutions, but broader adoption of staking benefits the ecosystem, not just at that layer but beyond. So when David, who's the founder of Babylon, said that he was making Bitcoin stakeable, I was like, okay, well, this seems like a natural movement for me, just given the fact that it's the largest asset that's like most held by the widest number of people. But yeah, that's my background.
You don't hear a lot of acquisitions in the crypto space, though recently there's been several. But what was that experience like working at a company that was later acquired by Eigenlayer?
Yeah, I mean you move fairly rapidly, so it's getting involved, you like getting going 0 to 1 within a week, as opposed to like a month or 2 months. But it was fun. It was a lot of stuff associated with like initial go to market that just needed to be done relatively quickly. I was an angel investor in Babylon before that, and that's why I moved over, because the goal was for them to build like a broader team based in NYC as we got closer to launching the network at Babylon. So um, yeah, yeah.
That's cool. Now, I've spoken with a number of DeFi projects, and every single one of them have said that for DeFi to really grow, BTC needs to be part of the equation.
Mhm.
And Babylon is like the category leader in that space. How do you envision these other DeFi projects that are right now in the Ethereum space primarily working with Babylon in the future?
Yeah, so the Genesis chain just launched. Right now, it's a CosmWasm chain, so no EVM support just yet. We do plan to launch an EVM layer on top of that Genesis protocol. And we have been talking to a lot of Ethereum developers who want to, potentially move a satellite version of their application on Genesis, or potentially launch like a branded, unique application on Genesis, with the goal of it being like more Bitcoin focused. And so I think a lot of this is all happening at the same time for Bitcoin, which is exciting. If you're looking at Ethereum, you had DeFi, and then you had staking, and then you had liquid staking, and then you had restaking, and all of that is happening like this year for Bitcoin. And it does benefit that we're kind of at the center of this, but like we can kind of target all 4 people that are building around those 4 verticals, and have them exist under our umbrella under some way, shape, or form. Whether you're a staker, an LST issuer, or a DeFi application, or a protocol that wants Bitcoin security. And then like us having this chain ourselves, we can kind of be this central point that can support the broader community, as long as they're connected to that protocol in some way.
You use the phrase, center of it all, and that's really pretty amazing how Babylon has become kind of the center of gravity in. I mean, so much Bitcoin has been staked on Babylon. How did you guys get to that stage where, I mean, it's you guys are like the 800-pound gorilla in kind of a short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we benefited from people spending like the past 5 years educating a wide group of people on what staking is, right? So as long as you built an experience that's familiar to folks who have staked ETH before, who have staked Solana, then your addressable market is significant in terms of like dollar value, and you really don't have to get the same amount of market share to get TVL that is similar to those protocols, right? So really, it was just like an educational like sort of go to market where it's like, hey, we're creating staking for Bitcoin. Obviously, the conversation is a little bit different because like people never expected to do anything with their Bitcoin for a bit on chain, at least. But if looking at how far this could run long term, you see like 27% of ETH is currently staked. About 0.2% of Bitcoin is staked via Babylon right now, and like only 1% or higher is represented within like the broader ecosystem in the form of a wrapper or like an LST. So you even if that increases 10x, right? Like Bitcoin does become one of the largest assets being used in DeFi, especially outside of stablecoins, right? So um, I I think it like happens slowly and it starts with staking, but then once that starts to be good, you'll see people thinking about this more broadly for a lot of different reasons, especially on the DeFi side, because if you can remove like the centralization risk associated with like WBTC or CBBTC, that collateral is definitely more pristine than an asset that's potentially more volatile, right? Like Bitcoin is generally the least volatile asset in the space.
Yeah. You mentioned WBTC and CBBTC. Do you view, I guess, how do you view Coinbase? Do you view them as a competition, or is there some level of co-opetition there?
Yeah, no, not at all, and not against centralized vehicles, especially if they do work better for certain people, depending on your jurisdiction or what you're able to do on chain. Any uh, way that you can get people to participate, especially if it's something that they're actively choosing themselves, is good for me. Like my want is more people just leveraging decentralized applications and protocols and blockchains. That being said, we have spoken to folks who do currently have like centralized wrapped assets and have the same conversations about them, potentially having some of that staked, right, as a differentiator within their product offering. Um, if one of your competitors is offering like even like 1% APY and you're not, it's naturally like a huge like competitive difference.
Mhm.
As long as um, the reward rate for staking Bitcoin is at a hurdle rate that makes sense for some of these folks, and that it stays like in that range for a long period of time, I think we see folks naturally come over who maybe um, you know uh, their product is a more centralized wrapper currently.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with risk appetite too. It's
Mhm.
there's different levels of risk, and being and providing a product that caters to a user that is more comfortable in taking specific risks that on decentralized exchanges or decentralized protocols makes a ton
Mhm.
of sense. Whereas some are more comfortable with centralized opportunities, and that's fine too.
Mhm.
Um, how do you think about go to market as a head of BD? Because you've got this two-sided market. I guess where do you spend most of your time? Do you spend it on the protocols that take advantage or that want to utilize the shared security, or is it on the other side in providing more education and getting more Bitcoin into the supply side?
Yeah, I would say until we launched our network, it was about half and half. But now that the Babylon Genesis chain is live, Bitcoin stakers are receiving a reward rate if they're staking Bitcoin, right? So um, that's like selling itself, in its own right. If you can see an APY on like an Explorer somewhere, there's less phone calls that need to be around like, educating people on why you should do this, especially if our documentation is good. So then like, a lot of my job recently has been, on the demand side. How are we growing this ecosystem? How are we, talking about like the benefits of not just Babylon, but, other, Bitcoin, focused applications and LSTs that are building on top of us, and how it relates to, your end users of your execution layer environment as well. So really like the goal is to get more assets on these Bitcoin secured networks, and really start the flywheel in the sense of like, we're targeting end user activity, adoption of BTC focused applications, and designing it in a way to where it does benefit the protocol that is actually paying for this Bitcoin security. So it is a lot of like iteration on what makes sense for what BSN, and making sure that we're like naturally like building this together to where it's complementary, not just to the Babylon protocol, but also Bitcoin stakers as well as people that are paying Bitcoin stakers.
As a Bitcoin, as developers look to Babylon to build their Bitcoin secured network, their BSN, what types of applications do you see Babylon enabling, or having, Babylon and the Bitcoin underneath enabling? Do you see primarily DeFi or other types of applications also?
Yeah, I mean primarily DeFi for the time being, just because it's it's a very simple, it's very easy to understand, right? Like there was 0 Bitcoin leveraging the staking protocol, and now there's 4 billion. A lot of that's in the form of LSTs. And these protocols are like, that sounds great. Like, how do we, get some of that on our protocol? And so then it is, making sure that they're, speaking to the right people on the LST side, and making sure that they're, understand that, you need to pay for the security, but then, in return, like people are naturally incentivized to come move over, and participate, because you're effectively like indirectly paying yourself if you are an LST, leveraging those people that are paying for Bitcoin security. So I think in the long run, that's how it, pans out, to where like a lot of this, decentralized Bitcoin liquidity exists on these BSNs, similar to how, most ETH that's being used as collateral exists on, Ethereum and rollups as opposed to Solana.
Let's maybe transition to the community side. What's with every crypto project, the community is really important. And in the community, you've got developers, you've got actual users, and then you've got retail folks that want to participate, but aren't necessarily stakers. I guess, how does Babylon view its community, and how do you give them kind of stuff to do, things to be responsible for? How do you help them feel part of the community?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a lot of community channels. We're fairly active on Twitter. But in terms of like the amount of people that have staked with us, it is a fairly significant number, given the fact that our staking window, until we just recently launched, was only open for about a week. And we had around 140,000 unique Bitcoin wallets that participated within that week-long period. So there definitely is like broader interest and usage on the Bitcoin staking side. The goal is to get more folks involved on the Babylon Genesis side as well now, just because we just launched that protocol last week. But again, it's a lot of education right now. It's people relearning something about Bitcoin, where it meant store value for a long period of time for a lot of people, and then people did things on Celsius and BlockFi, and then they said absolutely not, and now we're saying like, oh no, like this wasn't necessarily bad. It's like the actors that you had to trust at that point in time were bad, and then giving them a solution that makes sense for them from a UX perspective. But just yeah, I mean we have a fairly large community at this point.
Um, recently, Babylon had helped host an event called the Bitcoin Renaissance at ETH Denver,
Mhm.
and has been participating in other Cosmos events also. Tell us about what those meetups are like, and how does that help bridge and educate the broader ecosystem on the opportunity on Bitcoin in general.
Yeah, it's super helpful because sure, like we're the people that are organizing it, but it's also an event for the broader Bitcoin ecosystem and like beyond that, right? We invite folks who um, are on protocols that are very very far away from what is happening in terms of development on the Bitcoin network. But like the goal is to talk about Bitcoin as an asset. The goal is to talk about Bitcoin as a network, and then the goal is to talk about what those improvements upon both of those things mean for like everyone else that's participating in crypto. Just because Bitcoin is the largest asset in the space, um, not like trying to talk about price, but like the price of Bitcoin affects every other asset. And also, if there is some sort of like critical event with Bitcoin as a network, it would fundamentally change like the broader public's perception of the industry in general, right? So it's a very important network that I think doesn't necessarily get discussed about as much as it should be, and like the general more like Web3 sort of like conferences like ECC, for example, where maybe there's a lot more developers that attend those conferences historically, because there's not a lot of things that you can build on the Bitcoin network. And so like our goal is to kind of highlight to the broader community um, the developments that are happening with Bitcoin, whether that be like BitVM or like OPCat. But things are happening within the Bitcoin network. We like to be a part of that, but there's plenty of other people that are building very high quality things as well that we want to recognize and talk about.
Um, one more question before I ask my last one. I've been meeting with a lot of Bitcoin projects recently, and I met with Citrea just recently. How do you view, first of all, how do you view Citrea? Do you see them as a potential partner or competition? And how do you, um, and does Babylon have any competitors right now?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you use the word competitive. But like, sure, you could argue that some people that are building around Bitcoin are competing with us right now. But just given the addressable market and like, a little over 1% of Bitcoin is being used in DeFi, I don't think anyone is competing with like wide, market share that like kind of foundations them and being, um, an actor that would be hard to like, compete against, similar to like Lido or something, right? Like that, I don't think that's necessarily happened yet for Bitcoin. So a lot of this is actively like, working with them on things like, how do we talk about Bitcoin and the larger market? How do we like, at least create some standardization to where, we may be building our own thing and you may be building yours. And like, maybe there's ways to partner for us every now and then. But if we're all like just building our own thing without knowing what other people are going to build, it becomes like super, super complicated, right? So like, I think, if there wasn't like, Arbitrum stack and OP stack, and if every single rollup was completely different UX, on Ethereum, there would likely be less rollups and less users on those rollups. So I think we're getting to the point now to where, how do we create some standardization? And then maybe, there becomes a point where people feel like certain people are actively competing against one another, but really it's like just cooperative building right now, in my opinion.
And I think the perspective of knowing that around 1%, less than 1% of Bitcoin has been staked, and the addressable market is absolutely massive. I think helps to kind of curb the desire to compete, and instead, how can you cooperate with each other? Because
Mm.
the market is large. The pie is big enough for everybody, and I think how to grow it together, I think, becomes the key question. I remember when I started my career at Amazon a while ago, and Bezos, when he was asked, about competition between eBay and others, his response was always, the pie is big enough for everybody. let's just kind of find our niche and let's grow that as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty remarkable for someone who is hyper competitive for Bezos to say. But he actually really lived that, and it showed in like the Amazon culture. And I think that makes a ton of sense right now, especially in the Bitcoin space. It's just a very large market and very little has been staked. And so the opportunity is massive. My last question, Clayton, what excites you about where the Babylon community and ecosystem are heading in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is going to happen relatively quickly, right? I mean, people say that, you know, after you launch people who haven't launched a network before say like once you launch a network, it's like you can take a break. It's like, well, no. Now, like we can actually do things that we've been wanting to do for a very long time. So I think what excites me is seeing how this will evolve over time, and seeing some of the things that we've been iterating on with partners, and things that we've been wanting to announce for like weeks or months, coming out over the next weeks or months, and seeing how the community responds to the things that we've been building. Right, there really hasn't been a way for people to actively participate besides that week-long window that I mentioned earlier, which only existed in December of last year. So what excites me is like to see the growth and user adoption. More Bitcoin being staked, more people like leveraging apps that are being built on Genesis, and also receiving more inbound from people who want to be a Bitcoin secured network in the future, because now is the time that we can start onboarding those folks into the community.
Yeah, oftentimes it's like when after the Genesis, people kind of want to take a break, but that's actually when the real work starts. I mean, there's been a lot of work prior, but now it's serious work. So, well, best of luck to you and to the Babylon team, and congratulations on all the success so far. You guys are killing it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.